There has to be just a part of us as an indie over 50 artist who wish we could achieve rock star success. And I'm really excited today because the person I'm interviewing has been an indie over 50 artist, but also left school at 15, was signed in a rock band at the age of 18, achieved indie alternative success on the charts and radio, and then breakthrough commercial success. And that's talking teen magazines and all that goes with it. And right now, he's still an indie over 50 artist, gone full circle, releasing new music that you'll hear today. He's a lead singer of Caligula, a very successful Australian band that have achieved chart-topping success and ARIA Award nomination. That's a bit like our Grammys over here in Australia. Welcome to Caligula and Ash Rothschild.
The things that I said, it wasn't enough to save me. Oh, the things that I said, it wasn't enough to save me. Oh.
So welcome Ash Rothschild.
Thanks for having me.
And look, one thing I always ask everyone, where are you in the world?
I am right here in Sydney, Australia, out in a sunny, leafy suburban area called Kellyville.
Well, the beautiful pastures of Kellyville. Now, I know that because I'm from Sydney, so that's a pretty cool thing for you and I, actually from the same city. My other question for an indie over 50 artist is a challenge, is to ask you who your favourite artist is from the 21st century.
Favorite artist currently? There are a couple of bands that no one's ever heard because they're bands I coach, young kids.
Yeah.
At the moment, I'm writing with a bunch of 15, 14-year-olds, and they're just incredible. There's a band, an all-girl band called Kismet, another Sydney local band, and right now, they're probably one of my favorite bands. I've been getting right into a band called Johnny Hunter, who are a Sydney band that have relocated to the UK, and they sort of lean into that sort of post-punk kind of sound, and they're just one of those bands that I can't stop listening to.
It is awesome. And I'll tell you what we're going to do is we'll put the links below so that people can check out Johnny Hunter, and it's a watch for the future for Kismet. And we'll come back to that because that's about a little bit about what you're doing now as well. Another question, just to really, take you back in the time machine, what was the first thing you spent money on for music?
That would have been a Duran Duran album. My brother and I put in our pocket money and bought a live album called Arena, and that was quickly followed by Prince Charming, Adam and the Ants, and then sort of went on from there. Sorry, I gave you two, but
that's great. But they kind of like lay the foundation in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, it was early to mid '80s. I think we had a lot of music in our house. My mum was very musical and had we had upright piano there. Like most kids, listened to all the stuff your parents were playing. But the first one that we bought that was tangible and was ours and no one else's, that was Duran Duran. And still love that band to this day.
Interesting to hear about growing up in a musical household. And I guess that does lead to the question of, Ash, what was your music story? How did you get involved and how did you start?
I'm just thinking of what was in my house. There was always music playing, and my mum, as I said, played piano very well, and so we had a music room that had a piano in it and a stereo, and the music room. My brother wasn't particularly musical, but he still enjoyed it. We were both obsessed with sports, and I sort of leaned probably more into the music thing. And it was. I think I had a big inspiration was probably my mum, who really forced me to do piano lessons. up until I decided I wanted to play drums, and then that sort of took off from there. So that was the first musical instrument choice of mine was drums. Keyboards weren't, and one of those things that you hear people say all the time, like eternally grateful that I now, it's a great way to learn about music by playing piano because you kind of get all the fundamentals and your motor skills of using both hands, become quite quite good as you get along.
That's a great story that you had access to that music room, because just the physical space and access and freedom you had to explore and discover music through that process sounds so amazing.
Yeah, and it was, yeah. I'm eternally grateful for that. We were, as I said, we were very obsessed with sports as well. So I remember just doing both those things. But I think the difference was, without sounding 50 and over, um, there wasn't. I mean, I think I remember we had an Atari, a game console. There was only 3 channels, and we only of TV, and we kind of would watch Thunderbirds in the morning. We weren't really allowed to watch cartoons before school, and we didn't have devices as kids do now. So I think when you were sort of bored, you would just go into the music room, or you would go outside and kick a ball round. But if it was raining, it was probably the music room. By default, that was something that was in our house. And again, when you look back at it and you go, it was a real blessing because that's the informative years of picking up. And my kids now are obsessed with sports. It's the same way we were.
Interesting.
This is a music room that we're sitting in my house, and slowly they've kind of found their way in. But from many other musician friends of mine, they're like, you don't push them into it, because if you push them into it, being kids, they won't want to do it because it's not their choice. So I'm waiting for them to come in and make it their choice.
The door will be open.
You
So,
know what that's like, John. We're having that's
I
my
do.
dream, is having my kids play music and me being able to play music with them. So
Yeah, look, absolutely one of the you've called out there because we do know each other, of an amazing proud dad moment of being able to perform on stage with my daughter,
yeah,
Charlotte. Yeah,
incredible
just
singer and
life
something.
bucket moments. Yeah.
Mm,
Uh,
your daughter.
yeah. And, so with, when, okay, so you're mad on sport, you've got this music room, you're building these skills and interest and at this stage, a hobby. At which point of time did you have to choose between, and did you make this choice between being a doctor, a plumber, or a rock star?
No, no, not at all. Look, I was a school dropout, one of those ADHD kids that couldn't concentrate. I did okay at school. It's just not for some people. It sounds like a cop out. I just think some people aren't at the sort of learning the way learning was then. It was a little bit different. My parents suggested I had always had crazy hair. I had a pair of clippers and I was shaving my hair, and they suggested I went in to do hairdressing as a trade, because I wasn't really interested at school, and I think it was a wise move to get me into something that set me up learning how to be in the workforce rather than going to school and just doing nothing. So I started getting into, at that age, which would have been 15. I really started getting into music, and I was playing drums in a punk band, and I I I just really loved playing music, and I just wanted to be in bands. There was no careerist um, thought behind any of it. I just loved playing, and I'm one of those people. I see it in my son now. If I like something, I'll put everything into it. Like, I'm very obsessive and obsessive compulsive, and I kind of feel like you know I won't half-ass something. I'll really go, which is a blessing and a curse at the same time, because sometimes you realize you're sort of overdoing something, overcooking it. But nonetheless, the music thing, I just played in bands and I just loved playing in bands. I never thought anything. I mean, everyone has their idols and wants to be like their idols, but I didn't have any sort of grandeur plan of being a musician for a living. And I most certainly, even when my band got signed, we got a record deal, and I think I was 18 at the time, about 18, and I don't know, I just loved play. I really didn't equate it to being a careerist opportunity. And I still sort of, right through that, I didn't, because I always had a job, and job kind of subsidized my lifestyle of playing in bands, and you had to pay for rehearsals and like clothes and all that sort of stuff. When I started in the very late 80s and early 90s, it was very common for people in bands to be on the dole. It was just affordable to be able to try and do music full time. But I think I just liked nice things. I don't think I could have lived. I liked going out and clothes and cool stuff. So I know it sounds slightly materialistic. I'd never understood why you couldn't have a job and do the music thing at the same time, until I couldn't, which was when we started, doing TV performances and stuff, and our band really took off, and then we ended up on a wage, and that for a certain period of time, and that was our job. Although ironically, I still worked in my parents' pub because free beer and
What could go wrong? That sounds awesome.
yeah, yeah.
So tell us about that. You're a punk drummer, and then all of a sudden, at the age of 18, you're signed as the frontman and singer. So tell us how that transition happened. How
Okay.
did you get a recording contract? How did you become and get out front of the drums?
That is a good question. Okay, so look, as I said, I gravitated towards drums because hyperactive kid, noisy, and so I played that, and I played in this punk band, and I was really into it. I really loved playing drums. I was okay, and then I kind of had one of those epiphanies where I'm standing there looking at the back of the singer's head, and the singer's getting all this great attention. Being a sort of born show-off, attention seeker, I thought, this isn't right. I should be doing that. Nothing to do with, I always wanted to be a singer, or I really want to be able to express myself through lyrics. I just wanted I wanted to be at the front. I was behind this guy being blocked out, ridiculous, but pretty true. So I thought to myself, I want to sing. So I had friends that were in bands, and I said, hey, look, I want to sing in a band. They're like, sure, we put together this band. It was called Pillbox. It was this kind of like new wave band that had a drummer and a bass player and me singing, and we had sequences. And that was very late 80s, and it was very Depeche Mode, New Order kind of, that drum machines. I just was like, okay, this is it. This is, and I think I wasn't particularly that good at singing, but I had the kind of get up and go, and the thing to, to be a front man. I think it takes just a little bit of extra gumption, because you've really got to own it, and you've got to stand up there and command and all, and I never thought of it at the time. I just did it. Like, I didn't never think I was doing anything particularly wonderful. I just was like, oh, this is cool, being up the front, yeah, that's pretty much how the singing started. There's another thing, right? So when I played in the punk band, I was playing drums, and we just did a bunch of punk rock. We covers. We did, the Sex Pistols and the Clash and Dead Kennedys, the usual suspects. When I got into this other band, it was like we decided that we wanted to be a cross between, the Cure and New Order, and this is what we want to do. So we had a pretty good idea that we wanted to write our own stuff. And I mean, we were super young, and I don't think I really knew I didn't know how to songwrite. So I had the bass player in the band. He was like, "Yeah, well, I've written some songs before." And I was like, "Okay, great." So he ended up being the songwriter, and I would just write all my vocals, which is a constant right up until now.
You call it top lining now.
Is that right?
Like when you write, like if someone writes some music, but then you write the melody and the lyric.
Top-lining. Wow, I never knew that. Okay, well, that's interesting. Well, yes. So in effect, that's how I started doing that. And again, I had no idea what I was doing. I was literally just kind of putting words where the spots to put words and singing a melody that I thought was kind of catchy. And then, I was like, actually, I could do this. So then my band started playing gigs, the electronic one, Pillbox, and just because we were always at gigs, like we went to so many that people in the bands kind of knew us, and we were like, "Hey, we've got a band," And back then they'd go, "Have you got a demo tape?" And we're like, "Oh, okay." So we went and did a demo tape. We'd carry them to gigs, and we'd wait. Of course, wait till the band finished and they were pumped and say, "Hey, listen, we actually got a band. Here's our demo." And they're like, "Oh, cool." And then we started getting gigs because they were like, I mean, in all fairness, I don't think the demo was really any good, but we had a lot of friends between the three of us, and everyone knows that bums on seats are what you want, especially from any band, and especially a support, like an opening band. If they can bring 20, 30 people, I mean, that's what most bands are after. And so we started getting these gigs because they go, "Oh, they'll bring a crowd with them." And then we got sort of better and better. And then turns out I was a big Caligula fan. They were a band before that we used to go and watch. I used to skateboard everywhere, and I used to skateboard with the guitarist from Caligula. And he rang me up one day and said, "Hey, listen, our singer Jamie, he's actually moving to America." And I was like, "Oh, geez, what are you gonna do about that?" And he said, "Well, we're auditioning singers, and the guys all know you. You probably know our songs better than we do. Do you want to come in and have a sing?" And it's like, "Sure." And to me, they were a real band. We weren't a real band. We were just, we didn't really know what we were doing. They were a real band that had an EP out, and they got played on Triple J and all that sort of stuff. So, I'm trying to play it cool by saying, "Oh, they asked me," and of course I was losing my mind. And I thought, God, this is it. This is the real deal. I went to a rehearsal with them and sort of did my thing. And we back then when we all used to smoke cigarettes and drink beer, we're at the rehearsal room, and, I was sitting out there having my cigarette and they sort of came back out and they said, "Well, if you want the gig, it's yours. You've got it." And I was like, "Well, all right. Yeah, that's cool, pretty cool. That sounds good to me. It's trying to be really aloof and cool." And then, of course, I am dying on the inside. And so that was the start. And then basically we went from that. My first gig was at Whale Beach, a place called Moby's, with a band called Skunk Hour, who were from Mossman, surprisingly, same place I was from. They're like a sort of funk groove sort of band. We played there, and it's got to be a couple of hundred people. And the gig after that, I played with we played at the Phoenician Club, and I played with a band called Ned's Atomic Dustbin, this sort of 90s band that had two bass players they were from Stourbridge or some place in the middle of England. Anyway, they were very popular at the time, and there was maybe 600 people in this room, and I sort of that was a baptism of fire. And it sort of
just leveled up. You leveled up,
literally just into the frying pan. But you know what? I was sort of cocky, and you've got that bravado of being at that age where you're kind of bulletproof. And I got to say, it probably had a lot to do with alcohol back in the day. That like you can, you know, your inhibitions were pretty crazy, so you could just do anything. And so that's how it all started. And then shortly after that, we went into a recording
Well,
studio.
well, let's just capture that. I mean,
Oh,
let's accept
sorry.
it's a combination of bravado, talent, passion, and really good hair.
It's definitely about the hair, that's for sure. It was one of those things where it it doesn't always work. I did that rehearsal, and they weren't, I was into that sort of goth kind of that whole thing, and that they weren't. They'd come from punk rock, and they were doing a hybrid of, at the time, it sort of had rapping in it, and slap bass, and I sort of came in and I was like, I love you guys, but I don't know how to rap. Like, I wouldn't have a clue. I mean, I kind of sing more, and they were like, "That's fine. We're kind of thinking of moving the direction of what it was." So it succinctly came together and it was very lucky. It was Kismet, right? I don't know if there was a whole bunch of talent. There was probably something inside that they saw in me. I mean, they were all about 5 or 6 years older than me. Like I said, I had a bunch of friends that would come to the gigs. That helped, even in that band. And so I was lucky, and they were very patient with me until I kind of got my chops. And I'm a reasonably quick learner, so I sort of I got better quickly, because I sort of had to. I took it as much as I didn't take it seriously. I was serious about it, and I just wanted to be good. It was like, it's kind of like, this is my chance. I'm in a real band, like, not don't
So
mess.
you're in Caligula. All of a sudden, you've got hundreds of size audiences to play to. You're still young. How did this recording contract happen from there?
Right. So when we said, I mean, we instantly started gigging, and I learned that the songs that they already had, they'd already started working, like with Jamie, who had left. I took his spot, and they had already started working on an EP. So they were like, "Well, can you sing some stuff on this, and see what happens?" And so I did that, and put some vocals down, and we sort of shopped it round, and it ended up Universal, which at the time was Polygram, and we were on Phonogram, which is kind of like a subsidiary in there. So we got snapped up by them reasonably quick, and then we put the EP out, and it went, Triple J, because we had the push of a major label behind us, so it got straight into the right hands, and it quickly picked up high rotation on Triple J. And back then, like that is the dream. Anyone, I think, my age, because it's all a lot different now, but that was the dream, was just to get played on Triple J. My goal was always to play at the Hopeton, right?
Okay.
On Burke Street in Surrey Hills, for those of you here in Sydney, Australia, which was a little tiny corner pub, which I always thought was like our version of CBGB's, a dingy little place, small, only held a handful of people in there. But I'd gone there all, as an underage kid, snuck in there and watched all these fantastic bands. And so that was my goal, was to play at the Hopeton, right? And in that band I played in before, I played at the Hopeton. And so then the next one from there was a place called the Annandale Hotel in Annandale in Sydney. And then I got to play there with that other band. And so I was kind of hitting what I thought were my goals. And so the next thing was, after, gigging around a bit, was really, the two things that you wanted is a record deal, which seemed achievable at that stage because indie music was taking off, and they were all, as soon as Nirvana hit and Rat Cat were, before Nirvana in Australia, they hit there, and it was like, oh, right, it's not just Waterfront and Red Eye, who were kind of the labels in New South Wales. There was Citadel, a couple in Melbourne, a Go-Go, all these indie labels. There was more than that. It was opening up. And so then the dream became a record deal, of any sort, and getting played on Triple J. That was it. Triple M wasn't even an option. It wasn't even on the peripheral. It just, we were Triple J kids. That, we got our Bible every week, which was the On the Street or Drum Media.
On the Street, yeah.
That gave you your schedule for the week of what you were going to do, and kept you, up to date with what was going on with bands. And then, the goal was to have an interview in there too, in On the Street. Oh my God, can you imagine? So all these things were starting to percolate. It wasn't like a pipe dream thing that you'd probably, it's, maybe if you win the lotto, you'll the music lotto, you'll get in there. These were all realistic things. So back to what I was saying was that the dream was Triple J, and the dream was, going through these venues and perhaps a record deal. So we took that demo to Universal, and they signed us. And so we went into the studio and we recorded properly. That then got taken to Triple J, and they started flogging it, right? It became a nationwide station at that stage, which was, I think, 91. Because it used to just be Melbourne played Melbourne Star, Sydney played Sydney, so it became the broadcaster that went around Australia. So all of a sudden, back in those days, you had to either get your stuff on. In Melbourne, it was Triple R. In Brisbane, it was Triple Z. Triple J in Sydney, you had to somehow infiltrate it so that they would play it, or you just had to, just keep driving up and down the Hume and making, which we did, believe it or not. When you get that help from Triple J, you rock up and people have heard you. I'd like to say that things really changed when we started getting played on Triple J, because that was everything back then. I mean, it just really, and I'll tell you a funny story. My parents used to own restaurants and pubs. And at the time we owned a wine bar at McMahon's Point, or the Great Escape. For those of you over 50s, maybe over 60s, might remember that place. Anyway, we had a single out called The Bluff, and it was getting played on Rage and stuff like, so, it's, again, pivotal moments. Getting played on Rage. The
That's
next
ABC TV.
played on Rage is actually being on Rage as one of the guests. But anyway, I digress. So I was working in the restaurant, and the two of the chefs had been out to see us play, so they kind of knew, they knew our music if they heard it. And I heard this yelling from the kitchen. I was over in the bar, and I came running in, and there was the little ghetto blaster on the shelf above the stoves, and the chef was like going, yeah, and he's like, oh my God, and I was like, what? And he's going, dude, it's you. And I'm going, what is this? What is this? And he goes, it's Triple J. And I was just like, yes, pivot, life-changing moment. And and if that had been the only time, it would have been enough, So
First time on radio, that's beautiful.
Yeah, and it's that's a pivotal life moment. Like it's a real game changer. And so, and then fast forward, we put a couple more EPs out. We built more of a fan base around Australia. We started, and we did a lot of. I've got to say, we did a lot of international supports. We played with all sorts of bands. We would kind of play with anyone. We had a pretty exciting live show because the guys were punk rock guys, and it was high energy, so we could kind of hold our own with any genre. We weren't just stuck with playing bands who were playing electronic sort of stuff. And we were popular with our booking agent. So with the help from Triple J, and then doing these, playing in front of hundreds of people who might never ever see you because they're there to see an international, that boosted us up as well. and then it gave us more clout to get bigger international supports, rather than just these sort of alternative, indie stuff. So we did a couple of EPs and a couple of singles, and then we put out an album. And the album was, I think it was like got to number 12 or something. I don't know why I'm thinking that. I know it got to number 12.
Yes.
Oh, I said that. That's terrible.
It charted very, very well.
I think it was, but that was a game changer as well. And then we started, we were doing Hey Hey It's Saturday, and we starting to get on smash hits. And because once you've got that as an asset, an album, press will take more notice of you. It's you need an album, is what I'm trying to say. The T's not kicking in. So the album comes along, and then, I would say that's probably the time when I'd be a bit presumptuous to say that we were household names, but you find yourself getting recognized by people. Well, I did. I mean, we had a pretty strong look. The two guys in my band had long dreadlocks, and I had this black hair with red streak through it. And
Right. Yeah.
maintain that look. So, we were instantly recognizable.
I think at this time you went from that indie success, with Triple J and even Rage and On the Street, and all of a sudden you're talking Hey Hey It's Saturday and Smash Hits magazine. So you're going into that commercial success, that broad
Yeah.
commercial success at this stage, and you would have ended up on Triple M, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the weird thing was, so that you've got to remember that the musical landscape of that time was when grunge had hit, right? Mid-90s, and alternative music started charting on the mainstream charts, because back in the day you had the alternative charts and the mainstream charts. Most people know that Nirvana were the catalyst for that, and then all of a sudden the way that record companies work is whoever is doing best at the moment, they want to make more of that, because they're corporate money making machines, and that's what they do. It's a business. So all of a sudden all these alternative bands were starting to take off. They were getting signed to majors, and in America it was the Smashing Pumpkins and Faith No More. I mean, there were so many different bands, and through Europe. And then these bands were actually the new guard. So in Australia, which was dictated in the late 80s as the Triple M bands, were your Midnight Oils and In Excess and Crowded House and and Divinals, and those guys had owned it. And then all of a sudden this new wave of younger bands were coming through, and we were caught up in that wave as well. And so we started getting played on Triple M, which was never on our radar. It was like nothing to do with us not liking Triple M. It just, they don't play bands like us.
Yeah.
But then it was kind of like, oh, okay.
They do Barnsley and Farnham and
Yeah, and which is fine. We all grew up on that stuff. We didn't. It wasn't that we had a distaste for it. That's just, we came from the alternative. Got to understand, like, the alternative music scene was the alternative music scene. It had nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
It just wasn't. And then obviously the lines got blurred, and then bands who had aspired to be that, I guess, more commercial sound were then wearing flannelette shirts and growing their hair long, and and using not using clean sounding strats with delay on it. It became distortion and big muff pedals, and and then that's a sign of the times. The Schadenfreude. And so we also had quite a following of young girls, right? And that again is a blessing and a curse, right? You get young girls at the gigs, and then young boys come along because there's girls at the gigs. So that was a great benefit for us. And again, it wasn't that we were, crazy good-looking guys. I think we just had a lot of friends that were into that alternative scene that were girls, I guess. That happened, and we started getting put in Girlfriend magazine and Dolly magazine. Not because we were incredibly good looking, because the alternative band started being a thing. And then in all those teen magazines started how to be grunge and how to, it's all like that. And when it sort of got overblown. Now, seems like a great thing. That's when the term sellout had become a real thing through the 90s. And so, strangely enough, at the time, bands were trying to, like, I don't care, this, whatever. We don't want to be popular. Kurt Cobain was famous for saying he hated fame, but later on Dave Grohl would say, no, he wanted to be the biggest band in the world. He just had to be. He didn't want to be known that he wanted to be that. Truth be told. So anyway, there was all this dichotomy where, like, as you were starting to get more popular, people would call you a sellout, and it was like this stupid thing that went for ages. And people, and I remember saying in interviews, yeah, but we didn't sell out, I'm like, now you think about it, it's ridiculous. But at the time, everyone was worried about that, and it was a real sort of tagline thrown at bands, and it was a really, there's a really insulting thing. Oh, you'd sold out. And all the 80s bands are saying, yeah, we've sold out venues for years. At the same time that you celebrated yourself for becoming more popular and getting played on things like Triple M, at the same time it was kind of uncool with your peers, and everyone would play it down, and it was so stupid. Like, you felt guilty for getting more success, fortunately, there was no internet with all the trolls and stuff. So it's just, people would actually say, oh, man, you guys have sold out. Okay, sure.
You did cross over so much from indie, alternative, to that broad mainstream commercial success. Much of it driven by, your core, punk and new wave roots and grunge. And then you did have that amazing commercial success as well with a cover song. So do you want to talk to us about that story?
So at that time, record companies are formulaic, right? They follow whatever formula it is, because that's how they work. That's how they operate. It's no secret. But at that time, there was two things. You record a cover and you record a power ballad, right? That was a real late 80s, early 90s thing, power ballad.
Angry did that.
Faith No More did it. They did a cover ballad of Easy, the Commodores song. All the bands are doing it. Everyone was, and if they didn't do a cover, they'd do a ballad. It was, all the hair metal bands are doing it. Everyone was doing it. Anyway, the record company suggested that we were doing an album, but before we put the album out, they said, you should put a cover on it. And we were like, it seems to be. It was like when saxophone was everything.
Yeah.
Every solo in the 80s had a sax, everyone. Even my favorite band, The Cure, there's a song called A Night Like This, sax right through it. You're like, it got them. So we had two brothers in the band, Jamie and Sean. In the start of this interview, I was telling about how I got into the band and the singer had left.
Yes, Jamie. Yep.
So Caligula is Jamie and Sean Fonte, two brothers. Jamie left the band, and then he went to America. When he came back from America, he liked what we were doing, and we basically put Jamie back in the band as the keyboard player, and it took off. And so where it took off was with Jamie. Really, we kind of, we're I think when the record deal came in and everything, I think Jamie was in for all of that. So the two brothers were like, oh, hey, the thing of doing a cover. At the time, we were working with a guy called David Harrow, who was from this dub scene in the UK. Jamie and Sean were getting right into dub reggae at the time. And if you listen to our album, there's quite a few tracks which have these dub grooves on it. It was just the thing they were into at the time. Anyway, the guy from this band on new sound system, David Harrow, we were going to use him as a producer, and we're saying, hey, the record company suggested we do a cover, and we're thinking of doing the Tears of a Clown. There's a cover by the British Beat, this reggae band, kind of like Madness. And anyway, they did a cover of Tears of a Clown, and so we were doing a version of their version, but electronic, and that's how that happened. And to be honest, I never even heard the song, never, honestly. I had a vague recollection of hearing, but that's it. Couldn't have told you the words. I wouldn't have known it was called Tears of a Clown. So we went into the studio record, and they said, "Oh, hey, we're going to do this song, Tears of a Clown." I was like, "Oh, okay, all right." So I went and sort of, had a run through the vocals, and you've got to remember, I really hadn't done a lot of covers. I played drums, but I'd never sung covers before. Going to the studio, and I literally did one line at a time because I didn't know it well. So I'd go, all right, they'd drop in. Now, if there's a smile on my face, it's only they're trying to fool the public. Stop. Go back, drop me in. But when it comes down to first doing one line at a time. Again, we got that album done. Record company was like, that's got to be the single. It's catchy. And then like, oh, okay. We were like, yeah, okay, sure. And so we put that thing out, and it did really well for us. And it's, another blessing and a curse, like, do you want to be known as your most popular song? And it still is to this day. It's our most popular song. And, now we're completely cool with it. But, I remember feeling a little bit uncomfortable thinking, as a band, you put all this time and heart and soul into writing these songs, and the one that gets is the one that you didn't even write. So, it's sort of looming over us. And of course, now we're just like, we're just grateful that led us to many other things.
Firstly, it was originally a really great song. I think it's Smokey Robinson, was it? Miracles from the 60s. But yeah, it's so quintessential early 60s, like and that.
Yeah.
But I think your version of it was, to be fair, was really smoking. It was a great version, and we'll put the links below. And, I often say I missed the 90s, right? I was raising children, so the only music I recall from that period of time was the Wiggles and the Spice Girls. But I remember that song because, Tears of a Clown by Caligula was on, as you say, high rotation. It was on the great video clip. It was very around, and I always loved your version of it. So
thank you. You know what? It's still, if I'm at the dog park, and you're chatting away to the other dog owners there, and inevitably someone's going to go, "Oh, are you a musician?" It's it's definitely it's the tan skin and the colorful clothes I wear. But you have a chat about that, and I go, "Oh, what's the name of your band?" And I say, Caligula. Sometimes people go, "Oh, yeah, I remember those guys." And they go, "Oh, right, I don't know if I heard them." I go, "Oh, we did a song called Tears of a Clown," and they go, "Oh yeah, oh right." So, strangely enough, without a doubt, it sort of put us on the map even more so. I'm very happy that we did our own version as well. It sounds
very distinctive.
It sounds like all the other songs on the album. We're using the same guitar tones and the same electronics and stuff. We didn't do a soul version of it. It just wouldn't have worked. So we just did it sounding like us. I think we were just very lucky that it is such a beautiful song. But yeah, it could have tanked.
Well, you put your stamp on it, and it was successful. So yeah, that was terrific.
Thanks, John.
And then look, in terms of stepping forward now, so here we've gone, out of school, hairdresser, punk drums, exploring, defining bands, lots of friends, and that's how you kind of like engage with this industry. Recording contract, independent success, widespread commercial success, recognition. fast forward, there's a timeline for the band. So, since then, what's been your music career? How have you engaged with music after the heady days of Caligula as a popular band?
That's a great question. And well, it becomes it'll end up coming full circle. But before that, after the 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 band split up in I think about 97, and the other guys went off and formed a band called Primary, and that had the singer who ended up being in Sneaky Sound System, and they did really well. Continued the trajectory that Caligula had. I went straight back into my indie roots, believe it or not, and formed a indie rock band, because that was always my love, was drums, bass, guitars, and anyway, so I started doing that, and from there right up till now, I've been playing in indie rock bands on indie
Yeah.
labels and shoestring budgets, and so basically, I've been in bands since I was 15 and never not been in a band. So after Caligula, I did that, and I just kept doing. I mean, I just kept on being in bands. Nothing that did really anything like Caligula did. It was just, just loved playing. So I did that. I was in this band called Panic Syndrome, which is still together. It's a sort of dark indie, sort of gothy rock sort of thing. And we were doing a video clip for one of the songs from that band, and Jamie, the keyboard player from Caligula, was working at this place, Sydney Props. Long story short, we started chatting about the old days, and we're like, why don't we do this thing again? It's crazy that we don't do it again. And that's how that started. That went full circle.
So the reform.
Back to that. And in answer, on a sidestep to music, so I was playing in bands right up until, again, Caligula started. However, I had a friend that worked at a thing called School of Rock, which was in Newtown, and I didn't really know what it was. And was actually one of my clients who I used to cut his hair. And he was going to the States, and I said, "Oh, what are you going to do with your School of Rock thing?" And he goes, "Oh, man, you should do it." And I said, well, I don't even know what it is. He explained to me it was just like young kids. They put them into bands, and they coach them how to songwrite and stuff like that. Yeah, and so I started doing that just as, like on a Friday afternoon every week. This is not like working. This is just this is really cool. And I started doing more and more of that, and to the point where the woman who was running that thing, she had just finished her teaching degree, and she was going off to teach at high school. She said, "Look, I don't have time to run this thing anymore. You seem to be pretty into it. Like, do you want to take it over?" Yeah, okay. So I took that over, and I really sort of cut my teeth in how to sort of, in a very crude way, run a music school, and how to teach, and how to engage all these young artists. And then a friend of mine who worked at the rehearsal studio where I was doing that went over to a place called Big Music in Crow's Nest. She said, "You should come and check this place out." Long story short, I've been there for 10 years. And so that's been one of the best things that's ever happened to me, because I was just teaching kids there, one afternoon a week. It's turned into be a full-time job. Music had never been something that I'd earned a salary.
Well, let me say this to you as well. It's one of the best things that's happened to me. So I'm going to come back to that story as well. So look, Big Music, been an amazing experience for you, it sounds like. Also for me, coming along as, some corporate, escapee that wants to come along and get in touch with their musical roots. And that's how we met. And I've got to say, you've done an incredible job there. I've worked with you and I had the pleasure of actually performing on stage with you. So I got to tell you, that's a real kick for us. Any indie over 50 muso, any of the Big Music crew coming along and meeting you and having the opportunity to play with you as well.
Well, thanks, John. I mean, that's probably one of the most favorite things for me. There uh, is playing with people like yourself, and just we always say it's 2 hours where you just block out the rest of the world, and it's just music. It's music nerds sharing music and music joy, and so I'm very lucky and grateful that I found my way into that as a full-time job. There's not a lot of jobs in the music industry, but and ones where you actually physically get to get in there and play, and as well as that, you know, um, you know, there's songwriting there as well, which is something I'm really passionate about, and I get to do that with people like yourself um, in the future, and many others, and we have a recording studio in there as well. So, you know, um, as much as we do a lot of tuition and stuff, we actually get to create some wonderful music there. So, big music has allowed me to set up original band programs and recordings for kids and getting them to the next level, which is putting their own blueprint or their own footprint on this world. It's always learning covers is definitely a remarkable way to pick up your craft, and
Grow.
but when you start writing, I mean, it's just there's nothing quite like it. It's your own.
Ash, for so many of our indie over 50 community, some of us, have picked up a guitar for the first time at the age of 52. Others have been passionate amateur over many, many years, like myself. And there are those like yourself, like have actually made a career in music. You've reached commercial success, broad-based commercial success, and struck out on your own, independently, creating and pursuing your love of music, and creating your income through it. So, congratulations to you, and it's awesome to see you, being your best self, and really exciting to know in terms of that full circle moment with Caligula, you've got new music on the way.
Yes, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. Yeah, well, Caligula, we got back together. I think it's actually we've been back together for longer than we were at the start, which is a pretty common thread. And we've got a new single coming out called "Save Me," which we will get to listen to. But if it's out before August 2nd, we're playing a show at the Lansdowne, which is 30 years of Caligula. We're celebrating.
Great institution too.
It's
Yeah.
actually 34, but we just thought 30 sounded cooler. Yeah, we've got an album in the works. Lots of touring coming up. Lots of shows. We've kind of had a rebirth, and we're all at a different place in our life where it's just sheer. There's no competitiveness. We were always competing with other bands in a silly kind of way, not in a business like way, but when you are attached to a label like that, if you don't chart the way you did before, there's a lot of pressure on you. There's a lot of pressure to sell records or sell units, as it's called back in the day, and there's none of that pressure anymore. We just get to do it for the sheer love of it, and we still have quite a few people who come along who were from back there. We've got stuff up on all streaming platforms, and we've got new stuff coming up. I think there's about 6 or 7 new singles, as in new, since we reformed. So if anyone wants to have a listen, and see if there's any.
We'll have the links below, and we'll have some of that new music as well. Last question for you. Any advice for indie over 50 that are watching today?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing I would say is, the hardest thing to do at our age is to find people who have the same drive and commitment. We've all got a lot of stuff going on in our life, so it is hard to people to commit to rehearsing every week. But if you can find a bunch people that are that committed, hold on to them because, it's hard. It is difficult. I hear it every day. People are like, how do you find? And that's why a lot of people come to big music because, a lot of the grunt work is taken out of it. They know that they can find like-minded people that are as driven as them. So my advice would be, if you can find a good bunch, hold on to them. The other thing is, a lot of people just want to play music. They don't want to think about writing music. They just want to play it. The sheer fun of playing, which is wonderful. And it's great for you. It's great for the brain, and it's great for everything.
Social well-being, yeah.
Yeah, your mental health, your dexterity, everything. There's nothing negative about it. It's just a wonderful thing to do. Um, but I would say that people who want, like yourself, it's never too late to start songwriting, and it's never too late to start playing. And people don't think they can songwrite because they don't know how to do it. Every week, I show people, they go, "Wow, that's how you do. That's how you can do it." I'm like, "Yeah," and it's just next level. So my advice would be, if you've never written a song, give it a shot. You can do something really simple, even if it's just vocals. And if you want some help doing it, give me a yell. I'd be happy to show you.
Thank you so much for your time, Ash. What a wonderful way to close our chat today for Indie Over 50.
You're
I
very
want to
welcome.
thank you so much once again, Ash.
Thanks so much for having me, John.
Woo.